Well, thank you to everyone who's joined so far. We'll go ahead and kick this webinar off. All right. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining. This is the first in a new series that we're launching here at Prescouter called the Proven Innovator Series. The overarching goal is to provide strategies toward different aspects of product development and really understanding and learning new strategies to build a champion brand. Today we are joined by experts for both Kimberly-Clark and P&G. As a quick overview of our agenda today, we'll provide a brief introduction on Prescouter, as well as an overview of this web series, the topics we're covering today, and where we plan to dive into in the future. And then we will dive into brief presentations of the two topics we're covering today, followed by Q&A sessions. And as I mentioned, we encourage dialogue. Feel free to submit your questions. We will get through as many of them as we can. The goal here is to educate and to share ideas, and hopefully you leave today with some new ideas and inspiration for your own product development challenges. I will pass it off to Corey at this point.
Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Katz. I lead Prescouter's consumer goods division from a business development perspective. For those of you who are less familiar with Prescouter, very simply, we are a research consulting firm that helps clients with a variety of different business and technical challenges. That could be related to anything from technology landscapes, finding partners, understanding new market opportunities, regulatory risk, or even implementation with digital or AI applications. Really just depends on your goals. And it comes down to a couple things. Typically, our clients don't have the time to curate and make sense of all the information out there from their industry and other industries as well. So we function as an extension of their team, save them time, and add some much needed bandwidth. And at the end of the day, it's a validation. Folks want to make sure they haven't missed anything so they could be confident in their decision making. And part of how we do that is through this network. We've spent a decade building over 10,000 subject matter experts and advanced degree analysts from really every background you can think of. This allows us to staff a team on demand that's fully customized around the client challenge. And really our methodology involves assembling a pretty diverse team for each project, different disciplines and backgrounds, so we can approach the question from an unbiased perspective, enhance creative thinking, and connect the dots, understand what's happening in other industries outside of our particular client's use case. In fact, both of our guest speakers today are active members of this network. So happy to pass it over, introduce them.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. But first, I'll introduce myself. My name is Daniel Morales. I'm the Technical Director of Consumer Goods at Prescouter, and I will be one of the moderators of this webinar as we move forward.
And my name is Garrett Wheaton, and I'm a Senior Project Architect in the Consumer Goods vertical at Prescouter, and I'll be co-moderating with Daniel today. So excited to have everybody here and get an engaging conversation going on.
So as background, we work with champions of industry throughout our projects, and we've learned so much and thought it would be a wonderful outlet to share case studies, anecdotes, and stories to help folks along their product development journey regarding different aspects of the challenges we face today when creating new experiences for your consumers and end users, while also trying to balance the flood of information that's available and addressing some of the global concerns of today. So for today, we'll be focusing on two topics. This concept of humanity-centric innovation. What is it? And how can you implement that in your own product development strategies within your own organization? And also identifying a champion product. How do you balance the flood of information from technical prowess, efficacy of safety data, consumer needs, and also competitive intelligence to cut through the noise and identify the play to make. So we thank you all for joining, and we're excited to continue this webinar moving forward.
And yeah, thanks to everybody again for attending. I'm really extremely honored and excited to introduce our speakers today. First, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Pete Belcamera, who's the former Chief Science and R&D Vice President at Kimberly-Clark. He is now has his own business whose mission is to help people create businesses that improve people's lives. I'd also like to give a warm welcome to Betsy Bluestone, who's the former managing director at PG Ventures. And today, Betsy serves on multiple boards, advises startups, and is a strategic consultant to several companies and venture capital firms. And now with that, I'd like to turn it over to Pete. He's going to begin speaking to our first topic today about pioneering economically viable and sustainable humanity-centric innovation. So I'll let you take it from here, Pete.
Hey, great, Garrett. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here today. And yeah, Daniel, go to my first slide. Where I'd like to start this conversation is with the following perspective. It is estimated that over the last 50,000 years, 100 billion people have been born, lived, and died on this planet. And today, you and I make up one of 8 billion people living on the planet. And the United Nations estimates that over the next 50,000 years, 6.75 trillion people are yet to be born and live on this planet. And as Roman Krasnarek asks, will they consider us good ancestors? Will we have left them the resources they need to not only survive, but to thrive? Or put a different way, when they write their history books about us, will they talk about us creating the next Renaissance or the next Dark Ages? The choice is up to us. So if you go to my next slide, I've got a question for all of you, which is, who wants to be a billionaire? And if you go to my next slide, when I think about this, I really do believe we all have the opportunity to be a billionaire. If we just stop defining a billionaire as somebody who accumulates $1 billion and start defining it as somebody who helps 1 billion people. And I really do believe we can become billionaires through this concept of humanity-centric innovation. So what is humanity-centric innovation? If you go to my next slide, I'm sure you're familiar with consumer-centric innovation, which happens at this creative collision of what's needed by the consumer, what's required by the business, and what's possible through science and technology. And you can start with any one, right? I mean, you can start with a really cool technology, but you better have a business model where you can make money, and that technology better solve a problem that the consumer has. So again, you can start with any three, but you need all three to come together in this creative collision to create an innovation that matters to the consumer, creates value for the business, and really creates a reason to believe through science and technology. So if you go to the next slide, humanity-centric innovation is this creative collision of what are all the needs of humanity, coupled with what are the new business models of the 21st century, and then what are the exponential technologies that can enable all that. And again, it's about this creative collision of bringing those three things together to create innovations and solutions that benefit people's lives in an economically viable way. And so if you go to my next slide, when I talk about the needs of humanity, these are really captured well in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are goals like ending poverty, achieving gender equality, and taking climate action. And there's 17 of these, lots of opportunities for improvement and really solving significant problems around the world. If you go to my next slide, when I talk about these business models of the 21st century, these are really captured well in the book, The Future is Faster Than You Think. And these are business models like the free data economy of Google and Facebook, the crowd economy of Airbnb and Uber, or the smartness economy of ChatGPT. You go to my next slide, when I talk about exponential technologies, really what I'm talking about are those technologies that have increasing return on investment or increasing return on impact. These are technologies like nanotechnology, the ability to manipulate matter atom by atom, biotechnology, the ability to manage life gene by gene, quantum computers, artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, blockchain, additive manufacturing like 3D printing, and now we're even seeing atomically precise manufacturing. So if you go to my next slide, what this really is all about is this creative collision of really understanding what are the biggest needs of humanity, and then solving those problems in an economically viable way by using the business models of the 21st century and exponential technologies and bringing those together to create a portfolio of programs that really benefit people's lives. And if you go to my next slide, I think as a business, what you need to think about is how you can apply humanity-centric innovation to every single stage of the value chain, every stage of the supply chain, whether that's raw materials, how do you do that with a smaller carbon footprint, or working with suppliers to address scope 3 emissions, or operations to actually eliminate all waste in your operations, and so forth, and do this in a way that really does generate a circular economy, and you can provide benefits to everybody in an economically viable way. I always think about this idea of sustainability, and I think today we think sustainability is expensive. And I'm always reminded of a book by Philip Crosby in 1980. The book was called Quality is Free. And at the time, everybody thought quality was expensive. But what Philip Crosby said was, if you do it right the first time, quality is free. Well, I believe sustainability is free. If you can do it with less water, less energies, less materials, and less waste, I think sustainability is free. And I think the way we can achieve that is through humanity-centric innovation. So if you go to my last slide, what I'd like to leave you with is this quote, which I really love, which is, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And quite frankly, there's nobody better to create that future than the people in this call right here, right now. So thank you.
Wonderful, Pete. Thank you so much for providing an overview of this concept, and explaining some of the nuances of what does that mean and how can it be applied throughout the different stages of a product development journey. I'd like to kick off our Q&A session here, and I'll also stop the screen share. As a product development manager or innovation director at my organization, I love this idea. What steps can I take to start to implement a humanity-centric innovation strategy?
Well, I think humanity-centric innovation, quite frankly, any innovation starts with empathy. It starts with a empathetic understanding of the needs of others. And that's true in any product that you're developing, to really understand the needs of others. And so, I think what it first takes is an understanding of what are the needs of humanity. And it's pretty clear, whether it's, ending poverty or ending gender equality or what have you. But to me, it starts with this empathetic understanding. And one of the things I would like to see, I think it goes back to even our education system. Today we talk a lot about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And there's a move towards STEAM, which of course is including the arts in that. But something that I would like to see us have in schools is what I call STEAM E. And the E stands for ethics. It stands for empathy. It stands for envisioning. It stands for empowerment. It stands for entrepreneurialism. And so I think part of it, if we really want to have a humanity-centric innovation culture, I think it begins in the education system and then moves into businesses that really focus on creating solutions that are economically viable. An example would be, every time I look out my window and I see trees growing, I'm reminded that Mother Nature is taking carbon dioxide, water, and the free income of the sun to make complex carbohydrates. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us as a species. Mother Nature took the last 150 million years to drive hydrocarbons deep down into our lithosphere. We humans have spent the last 150 years pulling it up into our biosphere and burning it. There has to be a better way. And I think that better way is to move from hydrocarbons based on petroleum to carbohydrates, based on microbes and plants. And so, Daniel, it's this idea of solving a problem like plastics in our environment by using the power of biology and fermentation to create complex carbohydrates, but do that in an economically viable way through new types of business models as well. But I think it starts with just being curious. I think it starts with being empathetic. I think it starts with experimentation. And I think it requires what I call radical partnership or radical collaboration with others.
Thanks,
Well,
Pete.
great.
Go ahead, Garrett.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I appreciate that. We got a couple questions coming in from the audience, Pete. One of our attendees is curious to hear, any examples that come to mind around humanity-centric innovation, and maybe the development story that you've seen there, kind of as an example to the audience.
Yeah, one example comes to mind is, when I was with Kimberly-Clark, I had the privilege of being on something called the Toilet Board Coalition, which was really focused on solving the global sanitation crisis through entrepreneurialism. And I had the pleasure of working with a company called SatSense. And what SatSense was doing was taking data from the European Space Agency and then using that satellite data to provide information to companies to understand what their effluent looked like, what was the quality of the river water coming into their facility, and then to understand the effluent coming out. They also were using that data to really understand, water levels around their plants or where to build their plants. And so this is an example of using high technology to provide information to business leaders that can make business decisions on where they place their plant and how to monitor their operations so that they minimize their contaminants that go into the environment. So that would be one example that comes immediately to mind, Garrett, where a small company can help big companies using exponential data and a new business model.
Great. Thanks for answering that question from the audience.
I have another question, Pete. I'm curious. As a innovation director or a manager of a product portfolio, if we all have an established business and we're already thriving with our product, what are the levers I can pull, or how can I influence change to guide the product line that we already have out in the market toward a humanity-centric concept, while also, as we've mentioned, remaining economically viable to the business?
Yeah, and I'd be really interested in Betsy's perspective on this as well. But my experience has been, in my time at Dow Chemical, my time at Kimberly-Clark, and really any type of new business development, it always seems like there's these 5 pillars that need to come together or the whole thing falls apart. You have to have one, a value proposition that the consumer really understands. 2, you have to have a business model where you and your partners can make money. 3, you have to have a go-to-market strategy that you can actually execute in existing and new channels. 4, you need to have a pipeline of innovation, not just a one-trick pony, but a pipeline of innovation that creates anticipation in the consumer. And then 5 is you need a technology that gives the consumer and, quite frankly, the business a reason to believe that it can be achieved at a price they can afford. And what I found is if any one of those 5 things fall apart, the whole thing falls apart. And the same thing is true with humanity-centric innovation. It's got to be really a pain point in a consumer's life. It's got to be a business model that solves that pain point in an economically viable way. It has to be executed with maybe new channels, but where you can use existing channels. And then that picture I showed of creating a portfolio of innovation, you have to have a pipeline of innovation. If you just have one thing and you get it out there, you've got to anticipate and continue to fill that pipeline. And then, technology is where a lot of people start, but I think technology at the end of the day becomes an enabler for the other 4.
Wonderful.
Great.
Well,
Yeah, my only add there, and coming from my most recent Procter experience and working in the venture space, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes, is how important it really is to build those goals in from the beginning when you're creating new brands. And that's the same when you have an existing brand and you're focused on your pipeline. If you didn't do it perfectly before and you've got awareness of what needs to be done in the future, making sure that every innovation is that much better from a sustainability standpoint, from just really being focused on what will make the brand last and stand the test of time. So I do think it's both. It's so hard from a financial perspective to work retroactively. But if you keep that everything you do in the future, because all of these brands are so dependent on innovation, that pipeline of innovation, that it gets better every time.
Great insight, Betsy there, and Pete, great answer. One question coming in from the audience again here. Are there particularly any bottlenecks in implementing human-centric innovation that you kind of see, Pete? Challenges people need to overcome to kind of implement these types of humanity-centric innovation in their businesses?
Well, yeah, I think these are something like ending poverty, is a tremendous challenge, and understanding what types of new business models might actually eliminate poverty. So one may be cryptocurrency, and going to and another one might be data. So what I mean by that is, if data becomes the actual new currency for the world, most of the currency exists at what we call, quote unquote, the bottom of the pyramid. And if data becomes the new currency, will we see a wealth inversion in the 21st century? And the question becomes is how do we use that data as new currency and new business models to not only eliminate poverty, but to really create value for everybody. So these are very difficult problems, but I think they're going to take a completely new level of thinking in what the business model could be to be able to eliminate those problems. I always love this notion of how do we put poverty in a museum? That the only place a child could ever see poverty in the future is right next to the Tyrannosaurus Rex. So it's like, it's Saturday and it's like, hey, Dad, can you take me to the museum? I'd love to see what poverty was like. That's the vision, is how do you use new business models and technology to eliminate things like poverty? But it's a huge problem, of course.
Interesting.
So the key, Garrett, I think, it's like any other entrepreneur, right? You got to think big, you got to start small, you got to scale fast. And so, I think it's also about creating businesses with purpose. I think charities are important, but charities aren't scalable, businesses are. And so I think we need to create businesses with purpose. Not only does that help achieve humanity-centric innovation, but I also think if you look at the multi-generational studies, Gen Z wants to work for companies that have a real purpose. And so how do we create purpose, profit, and prosperity for all? as part of the offering, not only to our consumers, but to our employees.
Okay, makes sense to me. And looking at like larger established organizations, kind of what do you see as like the roadblocks, main barriers to kind of get out of the way for some of the larger companies to begin pursuing humanity-centric innovation? They might have more established infrastructure and the way they do business. How do you break the mold and start pushing towards humanity-centric innovation?
Yeah, and I do think part of it is the architecture of our organizations. I mean, most, if not all of, not all, but most of our organizations were all created before ChatGPT, created before the internet. And so our structure is still such that, I always think it's like Sir Francis Bacon, knowledge is power. And so our organizations are organized around controlling knowledge is power. But, post-internet, Einstein is right, imagination is more important than knowledge. And so the question becomes, how do we organize, get out of these silos and get more to business use cases? And so the examples almost like when electricity came along. People took out their big honking diesel motors, they put in an electrical motor, but they hooked up all the same pulleys to it, and then they wondered why they didn't gain any productivity. Well, with AI and with these exponential technologies, our organizations are still designed for diesel engines. And so I think there's a lot of roadblocks in our operating model. I've talked a lot about business model, but we also need to change our operating model.
Well, thanks, Pete, for answering those questions. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much, Pete. With that in mind, we are going to shift over to topic number 2 for today.
And yeah, thanks again for everybody for the wonderful conversation and the questions from the audience. With that, I'd kind of like to turn it over to our second speaker, Betsy Bluestone. She'll be speaking towards balancing consumer needs, competitive terrain, and technical prowess during the journey of building your champion product. So with that, Betsy, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. So like Pete, we share that passion for improving people's lives. My experience tends to be more on the consumer-centric innovation space, although when we were preparing for today, I told Pete that I'd sure like to be doing what he's doing. My perspective is actually quite brass tacks on how to manage innovation and to think through sort of the glut of information that is available, how to sift through that and figure out where you should be making your bets. So I'm going to first have a disclaimer, which is I am a commercial brain. I am not an R&D-er. My perspective is very much from a brand building perspective. I've had the pleasure of shamming as a product developer over the last 30 years of my career, and certainly have worked alongside some of the best innovators in the world and product developers in the world. And so my perspective on the subject actually has evolved quite significantly through different experiences that I've had. And so I want to stop for a minute and talk a little bit about P&G Ventures. I retired from Procter after 35 years in January, and so the sort of context for what I did in the last 5 years of my career and what I am doing today post P&G is really sort of informed by the work that we did with Inventors. And that was all about how do we create new businesses for P&G that are outside the core. That was our mandate. And so as you think about product innovation for our core businesses, if you are, working in laundry detergent or in baby diapers or in shampoo, you have a very strong infrastructure of technology and capability and all of that already exists. place where I was playing was, yes, tremendous gifts that could come from the core business to what we were building, but that technical expertise, and in some cases, even the consumer understanding, was not fully built in to the group. So we'd be working on something like understanding aging consumers and why it is that they are unable to age at home. What are the things that were happening that were preventing people from aging where they wanted to in place? And you start to understand, sort of what are the causes of falls? What are the causes, trying to understand, sort of mental health and isolation, understanding what happens as our skin thins or we have chronic diseases that makes healing more difficult. These were the things, so we were working in, and those are quite different from what P&G had at its core. And so, as I embarked on that work, there were certain things, of course, that were standard, right? It starts with consumer understanding. It starts with understanding kind of, what is the gap that exists today when you evaluate the competitive landscape, being able to understand what, kind of what is the thing that is making the products that are currently out there in a particular category unable to meet the consumer's needs to their satisfaction, right? And so really digging in and doing that work, understanding the jobs to be done, that type of work, of course, is at the core of everything. But what really came to the forefront as I started working in these new categories was how important it was to get the technical challenge. And so again, a commercial brain. And so the R&Ders on the phone might be saying, of course you need to understand, what the technical challenge is. And a lot of understanding needs gaps gets you to what the technical challenge is. But when you start looking at the landscape across the globe and understanding what technology is out there, what has made it to market, what has not made it to market, you start to really appreciate in a very different way why it is perhaps that nothing in the category is solving the consumer's needs. I'm working on a project today where the understanding of the biology is clear. It's known, but nobody has figured out how to make it stable. And so, you'd think, oh, okay, well, this is the problem to the way to solve the problem is through this particular technology. And when you peel back the layers, what you find is that the technical challenge is actually about something that's entirely different than the solution, right? And so that was something that really came into focus as I started doing this work that was again outside the core. The second piece is that route to technical prowess can be particularly efficient when your building blocks come both from inside your company and from outside your company. And I think a lot of big companies, mine included, are because we are so capable at innovation and at creating new products and things like that, we tend to go to what we already know how to do, and looking outside is not necessarily natural. And in fact, this quest, both for the deeper technical understanding and for being able to understand what existed outside of the walls of P&G, is what created this really fruitful partnership with Prescouter, because we started to find a repeatable way to take what we knew about the consumer, develop more fully that technical challenge, really understand what that technical challenge is, landscape the globe, what existed out there, figure out where were, and I think this was one of the most interesting things about the projects at P&G and since P&G, is the ability to figure out what are the super nodes that exist. If you want to work in a particular area and you are first at the beginning of looking for solutions that might exist outside of your four walls, the thing that starts to pop up is that there are centers of excellence that exist for almost every topic, sometimes many centers of excellence, but digging into those first often leads to both finding new technology, finding thought leaders and experts. And that really was something that it got to be a drum beat that we did with Prescouter. And then taking that, once we had surfaced potential candidates, really creating a rigorous way to evaluate technology that had been unearthed. And how do you evaluate technology across the entire scope, not just in the category where, or in the market where you're competing, but to look more broadly at all of the ways that the consumer might be solving that problem today. So anyway, quite a journey that we have been on in again creating something that is repeatable and comprehensive. The sort of impetus for this was an experience where I was sitting at Northwestern. They were reviewing technology that some of their PIs had, and a technology came forth on a project that we had been working on. And we had been working on this, and we were like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is exactly what we need to solve this problem. And they had already licensed it to L'Oreal and Gatorade. So there was this, oh crap moment of like, how could this possibly happen? And so the evolution of the way we thought about sourcing technology and vetting that technology sort of went into overdrive to make sure that that didn't happen to us again. So that's the story and the background.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Betsy. And I selfishly have many questions that I'd love to ask you, but I'll start. I'll use one to get the Q&A panel started. This question is about navigating situations where, and maybe toward your point with the Northwestern story, where as an organization, what you've found a technical advantage or a market gap, but the scientific evidence that you're seeing that validates an approach to pursue is conflicting with the results you're getting from consumer surveys or your consumer behavior understanding. What steps do you take to navigate that challenge?
Yeah. So to state the obvious, the object of the game is to have consumers buy what you're selling. And so, everybody has an experience, right? Where you're like, this is amazing. This technology is like, this is groundbreaking. People are gonna love it. And you put it out there and people are like, and there's lots of reasons why innovation doesn't catch fire. I think when you're working in the beginning of the innovation funnel and you strongly believe that you've got something that is technically superior and the consumer isn't seeing it, I think, the first place to start is sort of going back to the beginning and making sure that the assumptions that you have made based on your consumer insights and things like that is really to check that and make sure that you've nailed the job to be done. You have nailed what the gap is that the consumer really has. Sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's that the marketing doesn't work. Sometimes it's that your branding misses or is polarizing, and even if the technology is great, you're not getting the pull from consumers. So, and then of course there's the part that sometimes what people say and what people do are not the same. right? So they tell you, exactly what they're looking for. You give it to them on a silver platter, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't want that anymore," or whatever. This does happen, but I'm a huge fan of going back and sort of reworking your insights and the assumptions that you have made, but also having that be time bound. And so, when you're working in early in innovation, if you have something that, you've gone back to the drawing board, you've given it another, try or two, you've adjusted the communication, and consumers still aren't seeing it, or they don't think it's worth the price you're paying for, you're charging them for it, you got to move on. And that can be so hard when you are, and I think especially, when you're working with startups, and you're a big company and you're working at startups, and you believe in what they have built, and you have to sometimes walk away, and maybe come back and revisit it another time. But there's so much opportunity that when you get something that just doesn't click, you got to move on.
Yeah,
Thanks for that.
if I
Oh,
can
go for
add to
it, Pete.
that, Betsy, I mean, what I've seen so many times is that researchers are working on projects, but they really don't understand the accepted consumer belief. They don't understand the tension in their life. They don't understand the insight. They don't even understand the claims. Like, what's going to be on the box when it's sitting on the shelf? What's the box going to say, right? And it's like, I think if researchers can better understand the insights and the claims, and then work on the technology, it's a much better route to market than the other way around.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
So this kind of aligns with one of the questions coming in from the audience. Betsy, hearing from you, is there an example of like a product that didn't make it to market and kind of why? I know you mentioned, branding, people just don't like the product, your marketing strategy failed. So I think that's kind of an interesting question. Maybe if you have an example case and, telling us why a product failed to make it to market when you had to pull the plug and why.
Yeah. I think oftentimes it's business model. And you get to a place where all of the should cost work that you've done along the way that says that when I scale this, I'm going to be able to get to a place where, we can make a healthy margin, the retailer can make a healthy margin, the consumer can get a product that is a great value for them. And those three things just don't square. And so, I certainly have seen projects fall apart because the financials just don't work. I've also seen, examples where, we've sized the market in a way, and this is a big company problem. This is not everyone's problem, but my job was to help P&G build its next billion-dollar brands. And sometimes you've sized the market and you feel like you've got something that really is substantial and is going to attract a huge audience, and it ends up being more niche than you'd like it to be. Again, what does that go back to? It goes back to the financials. And then the third thing that I would say is that sometimes the state of the art just isn't there. And so you do understand the technical challenge, what it is that you're looking for. You go out there, on the hunt for technology building blocks that you can bring in with your own company's gifts and build a brand. And it doesn't exist. It's back to my example of stability. You understand the technology that's going to solve the problem, but if it can't sit on the shelf in a Walmart for 24 months, that's a non-starter.
Exactly. And Pete, I'd throw the same question to you as well. Betsy, thanks for the answer there. I think that was a great summary of it.
So what is that, Garrett?
I would be curious, in your professional career, if you kind of saw, hey, you had a new product for new market, you thought it was going to be a good fit, and then it failed, didn't make it to market, or failed project internally, and kind of, why that project might have failed. In Betsy's case, it seemed like it was the business model is kind of like usually the killer. I didn't know if it was similar for you as well.
Well, I've seen projects die for 1,000 different reasons, but it seems like a lot of times, it comes down to a lack of understanding of what really was the consumer need, what really was the business model, and do you really have a technology that can solve the problem at a price people can afford? Betsy, I mean, you and I have never known each other, but we've lived very parallel lives. I mean, that's what I was trying to do at Kimberly Clark as well. Was what are those next billion-dollar business? What is that domain expansion? And what I found is so many times in large corporations. I mean, Kimberly Clark is fantastic at innovating. I mean, participates in whatever 180 countries around the world. It's number one or two in every market it serves, where it's number two, usually P&G's number one, and vice versa and so forth. So it's an engine of innovation. But as soon as you get kind of one or two steps removed from either the brand, the product, the channel, the consumer, the technology, and if more than one of those things are changed, the complexity of that and the probability of success goes down. So I think it's really key to focus on, really what are your core strengths? And then just like an onion, how do you just move to that next level and not try to change all dimensions simultaneously? How do you just take what you've got and go through a new market or a new channel? Versus trying to come up with a new product, a new channel, a new business model, all simultaneously. And so I think it's the discipline that's required to be successful.
Okay, awesome. Another question coming in from the audience here, and I'll throw this one back to you, Betsy. Working at PG Ventures, you guys were, outside of PG, you're tasked with creating the next billion-dollar brand outside of, the core business. What did you do or approaches you had to create like a culture of, interest, curiosity for, external technology, innovation, things that were outside the core business?
So not too long ago, I was having a conversation with an entrepreneur in residence, and he was marveling at the fact that of all of the resources, time seems to be the one that big companies disregard most often. And so as I really was on a quest to accelerate our innovation and to accelerate that by bringing the best of the outside world in, there were two things to prove. The first was that we could find technically superior solutions outside of the company. And the second was that we could do it faster. And so that was really important for a bunch of different reasons, right? Innovation hubs inside companies tend to be resource constrained. And so time really is important. And certainly from the perspective of first mover advantage, you don't want to sit on an insight until somebody else comes to market with it. And so really, trying to infuse the organization with urgency, I think is sort of the best way to get people focused on external technology and how that external technology can help you get to your goals faster. The second thing that I would say is that the reward systems have to line up. If you are an R&D person, if you are a product developer working inside a company, you are traditionally rewarded for innovating in-house. That's where the recognition comes from. And so within innovation hubs inside of big companies, you have to get to the place where making something that you sourced externally successful inside the big company is as valued, is as recognized, is as celebrated as the things that you come up with yourself in-house. And I think that cultural piece is really, really at the heart of opening the doors up for innovation to flow into big companies.
Exactly. So kind of having that innovation hub, the urgency, and then reworking kind of the reward system is kind of key things you see to creating that curiosity to look for external innovation, which then accelerates the business.
No doubt.
No doubt. Pete, that kind of aligns with what you're talking to humanity-centric innovation. Are those kind of the similar elements to create that, interest, curiosity to bring in external technologies that could have a boost on the humanity side for, larger CPG and food and beverage companies?
Yeah, I agree with Betsy. I mean, I think both incentive and culture, one of there's an Upton Sinclair quote, which is, it's hard to get a person to understand something if their salary requires them not to understand it. And, you run into that a lot within, people do what they're paid to do. So you got to make sure the incentive system aligns with what you're asking people to do. The other thing on the cultural side, one of the things that I used to run into, and Betsy, I'd be interested if this is something you've seen as well, but it seems like, a large corporation tends to say no until they absolutely have to say yes. And entrepreneurs tend to say yes until they absolutely have to say no, which creates this conflict that you have to be able to manage in those relationships and those partnerships to get to a win-win or no deal, and be able to bridge that cultural gap. But that's one of the things that I've observed a number of times as we've tried to do something different.
Yeah, we used to say we were the get to yes people, and there were times when I would say, could we just get to maybe? If we could even just get to maybe, I'd be thrilled, right? If we could just get to, okay, we're interested enough, not to throw this idea out. Let's do a little work. Let's experiment a bit, and set up the success criteria so that when we get to the end of it, we can say, this actually has legs or it doesn't. But anyway,
I love
start
that.
with get to maybe.
You know what I used to always say? Let's get to know quickly. Either NO,
Mhm.
we're not going to do it, or KNOW, we know we are. So let's get to
Yes,
know
excellent.
quickly. And the other thing I used to always tell teams is never accept no from anybody that doesn't have the authority to tell you yes. How many
Yes.
times do we listen to a no, but that person couldn't have told you yes in the first place? So I used to always tell my teams, never accept no from anybody that doesn't have the authority to tell you yes.
Yeah, sage wisdom.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Pete. I'm frantically taking notes here in the background.
Me too.
We're already up to the end of this webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting both of you, Betsy and Pete. Thank you so much for your insights and sharing your nuggets of wisdom. There's been a common question, and Pete, if you could answer this in 30 seconds, it's come in so much. Why is their world map upside down, Pete?
Yeah, well, the words are right side up. The short answer is there is no upside down from outer space. And I'm always intrigued how assumptions become quote unquote facts that actually rule the paradigm in which we see the world. So the whole point of the map is to question assumptions. But the other thing I like about this map is so many maps, the UK is at the center at the top. This map, Africa is actually at the center at the top. I think it talks about the importance of developing nations. I think it talks about the importance of diversity and inclusion. And really, it's about changing the way you see everything and be more curious in the world and challenge assumptions to get to the right answer. I always say a fish discovers water last. And so many times, we're swimming in an environment and we're invisible to it until we're pulled out, gasping for breath, looking back, saying, oh my God, is that the environment I've been in this all this time? It's time to change it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that, Pete. It was interesting how many questions were coming in on that. So there you go for the audience. Want to thank everyone so much for joining. I'm going to pass it off to Corey for final comments, but please be on the lookout for continued webinars in this series as we enter 2024.
Thanks, Daniel, and thank you so much, Pete and Betsy, for your time. So you'll see listed below on the screen are a few of the strategies that Prescatter leverages to assist clients around product development. If you're ever interested in learning how we might be able to help with some of your initiatives, definitely don't hesitate to reach out at the email below, or you can scan the QR code and that should bring you right there. But as Daniel mentioned, keep an eye out for our next webinar in 2024. And really, thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Thank
Bye.
you.